Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the air shift when a specific person notices you? That subtle change in atmosphere that makes your skin crawl, even though you can't quite put your finger on why. You're not imagining it. Your unconscious mind is picking up on something your rational brain hasn't fully processed yet. Someone close to you might perhaps someone you trust, someone you consider a friend, maybe even family, secretly harbors feelings of resentment, jealousy, or outright hatred toward you. The truth is, most people who hate you will never tell you directly. They've learned to mask their true feelings behind smiles, supportive words, and seemingly caring gestures, but the human psyche cannot hide everything. There are always signs, always breadcrumbs that lead back to their authentic emotions. Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds to study human psychology, understood that what we despise in others often reflects what we cannot accept in ourselves. He called this the shadow bias, those parts of our personality that we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. When someone secretly hates you, they're often projecting their own unhealed wounds, their own failures, their own inadequacies onto you. But here's what makes this particularly insidious. These people don't just dislike you from a distance. They stay close. They maintain the relationship. They continue to interact with you regularly, all while harboring these negative feelings. This creates a psychological battlefield where you're fighting an enemy you don't even know exists. Why do they stay close if they hate you? Because you represent something they want but cannot have. You embody qualities they wish they possessed. You've achieved things they've only dreamed of. Your very existence reminds them of their own limitations, and rather than face that painful truth about themselves, they turn their frustration outward. Your success becomes their failure. Your happiness becomes their torment. Your confidence becomes their insecurity. The first sign that someone close to you secretly hates you is what I call the subtle energy shift. You know this feeling intimately, even if you've never named it. You walk into a space where this person is present, and something changes. The conversation becomes forced. Laughter feels artificial. The warmth that should exist between people who care about each other simply isn't there. This isn't about obvious hostility. Obvious hostility would be easier to deal with. This is about the absence of genuine warmth. It's about the way their body language shifts, almost imperceptibly when you approach. Their shoulders tense slightly. Their smile becomes a mask rather than an expression of joy. Their eyes don't quite meet yours the way they used to. You might find yourself questioning your own perception. Am I being paranoid? Am I overthinking this? But Jung would tell you to trust your unconscious awareness. Your psyche is incredibly sophisticated at detecting threats, even subtle ones. When someone's energy toward you has shifted from authentic care to disguised resentment, your nervous system registers this change long before your conscious mind can articulate it. Think about the last time you were with this person. How did your body feel? Did you notice tension in your shoulders that wasn't there before? Did you find yourself choosing your words more carefully? Did you leave the interaction feeling drained rather than energized? These physical responses aren't coincidental. They're your psychological defense system responding to an emotional threat. When someone harbors secret negative feelings toward you, they emit a subtle but persistent energy of judgment, criticism, and disapproval. Your unconscious mind picks up on this energy and prepares your body for conflict, even when no obvious conflict is occurring. The person who secretly hates you has become skilled at maintaining a facade of normalcy. They've learned to say the right things, make the appropriate gestures, and present themselves as someone who cares about your well-being. But energy doesn't lie. The authentic feeling behind their words and actions seeps through despite their best efforts to conceal it. You start to notice that conversations with them feel like performances rather than genuine exchanges. There's a quality of artificiality that hangs in the air. They're playing a role, the role of someone who likes you, and you unconsciously sense the gap between their performance and their true feelings. The second sign reveals itself through what appears to be kindness, the compliment that cuts. This person has mastered the art of giving you praise that somehow leaves you feeling worse about yourself rather than better. They've learned to weaponize positivity, turning compliments into subtle attacks on your self-worth. You look great. You've really learned to work with what you have. I'm so proud of how you've finally started to get your life together. You're so brave for wearing that outfit. I could never be that confident. Notice how each of these statements contains two messages. The surface message appears supportive and loving. The hidden message carries criticism, judgment, or a subtle put-down. This is psychological warfare disguised as care. Jung understood that this type of behavior stems from what he calls psychological projection. The person giving these backhanded compliments is projecting their own insecurities onto you. They cannot bear to acknowledge their own flaws, so they unconsciously attempt to highlight yours while maintaining plausible deniability. When they comment on how you've learned to work with what you have, they're expressing their own dissatisfaction with their appearance while disguising it as a compliment to you. When they praise your bravery for wearing something they wouldn't wear, they're revealing their own insecurity about taking risks or standing out. These comments leave you feeling confused and unsettled because your psyche recognizes the attack even when your rational mind struggles to identify exactly what happened. You know something felt off about the interaction, but you can't quite put your finger on what was wrong with someone giving you a compliment. This confusion is intentional. The person delivering these cutting compliments maintains their image as someone who supports you while simultaneously undermining your confidence. They get to express their negative feelings toward you without taking responsibility for being cruel or unkind. You might find yourself replaying these interactions in your mind, trying to understand why a positive comment left you feeling so deflated. You question whether you're being too sensitive or reading too much into innocent remarks. But your emotional response is telling you something important. These weren't innocent remarks. They were calculated attacks designed to chip away at your self-esteem while maintaining the attacker's plausible deniability. Pay attention to how you feel after receiving compliments from this person. Do you feel uplifted and appreciated, or do you feel somehow diminished? Do their words of praise inspire confidence, or do they plant seeds of self-doubt? Your emotional response reveals the true intention behind their words. The third sign manifests in how they interact with you in group settings. They become the conversation hijacker. This person has developed an almost supernatural ability to redirect attention away from you whenever you begin to receive positive recognition or engage others in meaningful dialogue. You start telling a story about a recent accomplishment, and suddenly they remember a similar but somehow more impressive story of their own. You share exciting news about your life, and they immediately shift the focus to their own experiences or problems. You're having an engaging conversation with others, and they find a way to insert themselves as the central figure. This isn't accidental. This isn't simply someone who's naturally talkative or enthusiastic about sharing their own experiences. This is a deliberate pattern of behavior designed to ensure that you never receive sustained positive attention when they're present. Jung would recognize this as another form of shadow projection. The person who consistently hijacks conversations away from you is struggling with their own need for attention and validation. Rather than examining why they feel so threatened by your moments of recognition, they unconsciously work to sabotage those moments. Watch how this plays out over time. Notice whether this person can genuinely celebrate your successes or if they always find a way to redirect the spotlight back to themselves. Pay attention to whether they can sit comfortably while others show interest in your life, or if they become increasingly agitated and desperate to reclaim center stage. The conversation hijacker often uses specific tactics that are difficult to call out directly. They might interrupt you with urgent questions about something completely unrelated to what you were discussing. They might suddenly remember a crisis in their own life that requires immediate attention and sympathy from the group. They might begin telling a story that starts as if it relates to yours, but quickly becomes entirely about them. You find yourself constantly being cut off, talked over, or overshadowed. Your stories never quite get finished when this person is around. Your achievements get minimized or forgotten as the conversation moves to focus on their experiences instead. This pattern leaves you feeling invisible and unimportant. You begin to question whether your stories are worth telling, whether your experiences matter, whether anyone is actually interested in what you have to say. The conversation hijacker has successfully planted seeds of self-doubt about your value and worthiness of attention. But here's what's really happening. They're so threatened by your ability to engage others, by your natural charisma, by the genuine interest people show in your life, that they cannot bear to let you have those moments. Your shine reminds them of their own dimness, and rather than work on becoming more interesting or engaging themselves, they choose to diminish your light. The psychological mechanism at work here is what Jung called the inferior function. Everyone has aspects of their personality that are less developed, areas where they feel inadequate or insecure. When the conversation hijacker sees you effortlessly commanding attention or respect in areas where they feel deficient, they experience a painful reminder of their own limitations. Instead of using this as motivation for personal growth, they choose to tear you down. They cannot stand to see you succeeding in areas where they struggle, so they work to ensure that your successes are short-lived and overshadowed by their own desperate attempts at relevance. You start to notice that you censor yourself around this person. You downplay your achievements before sharing them, hoping to avoid triggering their need to compete or overshadow you. You find yourself holding back parts of your personality that shine too brightly, that might make them uncomfortable. This self-censorship is a sign that you've unconsciously recognized the threat they pose to your self-expression. Your psyche is trying to protect you from their subtle attacks by encouraging you to make yourself smaller, less noticeable, less threatening to their fragile ego. But making yourself smaller doesn't solve the problem. It only enables their behavior and teaches your unconscious mind that your natural brilliance is something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. The person who secretly hates you has learned to use your own kindness and consideration against you. They know that you don't want to hurt their feelings or create conflict, so they exploit your desire to maintain harmony. They count on your reluctance to call out their behavior directly, knowing that most people will choose to diminish themselves rather than confront someone they care about. As these patterns continue, you begin to feel increasingly disconnected from your authentic self when this person is around. The energy shift in their presence, the subtle cuts disguised as compliments, and the constant redirection of attention away from you all combine to create an environment where your true self cannot emerge safely. You're walking on eggshells without fully understanding why. You're performing a version of yourself that feels hollow and inauthentic, but you can't quite identify what's driving this performance. You're experiencing the psychological impact of being in relationship with someone whose unconscious mission is to keep you small, dim, and diminished. Jung believed that becoming conscious of these dynamics is the first step toward healing them. The moment you begin to recognize these patterns, you start to reclaim your power. The moment you trust your unconscious wisdom about how this person really feels toward you, you stop gaslighting yourself about your own perceptions. But recognition is only the beginning. These signs we've explored mixed, the energy shift, the cutting compliments, the conversation hijacking, are just the surface manifestation of deeper psychological patterns at work. To truly understand what's happening and why, we need to go deeper into the psyche of someone who maintains closeness with a person they secretly resent. The question isn't just how to recognize these signs, but why someone would choose to stay close to a person they harbor negative feelings toward. What psychological needs are being met by maintaining this toxic dynamic? What parts of themselves are they avoiding by focusing their energy on resenting you? The psychological needs driving someone to maintain closeness with a person they secretly resent run far deeper than simple jealousy or competition. Carl Jung understood that we often stay closest to those who trigger our most unhealed wounds because proximity to our triggers offers the greatest opportunity for psychological growth. If we're brave enough to face what they're showing us about ourselves, but most people aren't that brave. Instead, they use you as a mirror to avoid looking directly at their own reflection. They stay close because your presence serves a crucial psychological function. You become the repository for everything they cannot accept about themselves. You become their external shadow, carrying the burden of their disowned traits and unfulfilled potential. This creates a complex dynamic where they simultaneously need you and resent you. They need you to exist so they can project their self-hatred onto you rather than facing it directly. But they resent you because your very existence forces them to confront the gap between who they are and who they wish they could be. The fourth sign reveals itself through absence rather than presence, the support that never comes. This person has become masterful at being unavailable during your most crucial moments. When you're celebrating a major victory, they're suddenly busy. When you're facing a significant challenge, they're mysteriously unreachable. When you need emotional support most desperately, they've developed an urgent crisis of their own. At first, you might attribute this to coincidence. People get busy, life gets complicated. Everyone has their own struggles to deal with. But as the pattern repeats, you begin to notice something unsettling. Their absence isn't random. It's strategically timed to your moments of greatest need and greatest triumph. When you land the job you've been working toward for months, they can't make time to celebrate with you. When you're going through a painful breakup, they're too overwhelmed with their own problems to offer comfort. When you achieve something significant, they respond with brief, lukewarm congratulations before quickly changing the subject. This selective unavailability serves multiple psychological functions for someone who secretly resents you. First, it allows them to avoid participating in your joy, which would require them to acknowledge your successes and feel genuine happiness for you, something their resentment makes impossible. Second, it prevents them from having to offer the kind of emotional support that would deepen your bond and increase their internal conflict about their negative feelings toward you. Jung would recognize this as what he called psychological splitting. The person cannot integrate their conflicting feelings about you, minds the part that genuinely cares and the part that harbors resentment, so they resolve this internal conflict by withdrawing during moments when the caring part would naturally emerge. But there's something even more insidious at work here. By consistently being absent during your highs and lows, they're subtly training you to stop expecting support from them. They're conditioning you to turn elsewhere for celebration and comfort, which allows them to maintain the relationship without having to confront their true feelings. You find yourself making excuses for their absence. They're going through a tough time right now. They're just really busy with work. they don't handle emotional situations well, but underneath these rational explanations, you feel a growing sense of loneliness and disappointment. You start to wonder if you matter to this person at all. The answer is yes, you matter, but not in the way you hope. You matter as a psychological dumping ground for their unprocessed emotions. You matter as a convenient target for their projections. You matter as a way for them to avoid dealing with their own inadequacies. But you don't matter as a complete human being deserving of support, celebration, and genuine care. This realization is painful because it forces you to confront the possibility that someone you've trusted and cared about has been using you to manage their own psychological dysfunction rather than relating to you as a whole person. The pattern of absent support creates a cruel irony. The moments when you most need connection and validation are precisely the moments when this person ensures you experience isolation and disappointment. They've unconsciously learned that your pain and your joy both threaten their carefully constructed defense mechanisms, so they simply remove themselves from situations where they might have to witness either. The fifth sign manifests as information gatekeeping, minus. The deliberate withholding of knowledge, opportunities, or connections that could benefit you. This person has access to information that would help you professionally, personally, or socially. But they consistently forget to share it with you. They know about job openings in your field, but don't mention them. They have connections who could advance your career, but never make introductions. They learn about opportunities that align perfectly with your interests, but somehow never get around to telling you about them. This isn't simple oversight or forgetfulness. This is unconscious sabotage driven by their need to maintain some sense of superiority or advantage over you. On some level, they understand that your success threatens their fragile self-concept, so they work to limit your access to the resources that might accelerate that success. The information gatekeeping is particularly cruel because it masquerades as protective behavior. When confronted, they might claim they didn't want to get your hopes up, or they thought you were too busy, or they weren't sure if you'd be interested. But these excuses don't hold up under scrutiny because they consistently err on the side of withholding rather than sharing. Jung understood that this type of behavior stems from what he called the inferior function, those aspects of personality that remain underdeveloped and create feelings of inadequacy. When someone consistently withholds information that could help you, they're unconsciously trying to keep you operating from a position of disadvantage so they can maintain their sense of being more informed, more connected, or more valuable. The psychological mechanism here is complex. They're not consciously plotting your failure, but they're unconsciously invested in your struggles. Your challenges make them feel better about their own limitations. Your setbacks provide relief from the pressure of comparison. Your lack of certain opportunities allows them to maintain their sense of being ahead of you in some measurable way. You start to notice that you often learn about opportunities after they've passed. You hear about networking events after they've happened. You discover job openings after the application deadlines have closed. When you express frustration about missed opportunities, this person offers sympathy while carefully avoiding any mention of their prior knowledge. The cruelest aspect of information gatekeeping is how it compounds over time. Each missed opportunity represents not just a single loss, but a cascade of potential connections, experiences, and growth that would have stemmed from that opportunity. They're not just withholding information, they're limiting your entire trajectory of development and success. This pattern creates a psychological double bind. You begin to feel left out and behind, which increases your dependence on this person for information and support. But they're the very person who's systematically limiting your access to the resources you need to feel confident and connected. They create the problem and then position themselves as the solution, ensuring your continued psychological dependence on them. The sixth sign appears as emotional vampirism mingers, the systematic draining of your emotional energy while feeding their own ego and sense of importance. This person has learned to position themselves as perpetually in crisis, constantly needing your support, advice, and emotional labor, while remaining mysteriously unavailable when you need the same from them. Every conversation becomes about their problems, their struggles, their needs, their drama. They've developed an almost supernatural ability to redirect any discussion back to their own emotional state, regardless of what you originally wanted to talk about. You could be sharing exciting news about your life, and within minutes, you find yourself offering comfort and advice about their latest crisis. This isn't the natural ebb and flow of reciprocal emotional support that characterizes healthy relationships. This is a consistent pattern where you give and they take, where you support and they consume, where you offer energy and they drain it without ever filling your cup in return. Jung would identify this as psychological parasitism. The emotional vampire cannot generate their own sense of worth, stability, or importance, so they unconsciously attach themselves to people who can provide these things. They've learned that by maintaining a constant state of crisis or need, they can ensure continued attention and emotional investment from others. But here's what makes this particularly insidious when it comes from someone who secretly resents you. They're using your own empathy and caring nature against you. They know that you're someone who naturally wants to help and support others, so they exploit this quality to ensure that most of your emotional energy goes toward managing their psychological state, rather than nurturing your own growth and well-being. The emotional vampire creates artificial urgency around their problems. Everything is a crisis that requires immediate attention. Every setback is catastrophic and demands extensive processing. Every decision they need to make somehow becomes an emergency that requires hours of your time and emotional labor to resolve. You find yourself constantly in the role of counselor, advisor, and emotional first aid provider. Your phone buzzes with their latest crisis. Your free time gets consumed by lengthy conversations about their problems. Your mental space becomes occupied with worry about their well-being and strategies for helping them cope. Meanwhile, your own needs get pushed aside. Your own challenges seem less urgent in comparison to their constant crisis. Your own emotional processing gets delayed because you're too busy managing their psychological state. You begin to feel guilty for having needs of your own when this person is clearly struggling so much. This is exactly what they unconsciously want. By positioning themselves as more needy, more fragile, more deserving of attention and care, they ensure that you remain focused on them rather than on your own development and success. They've found a way to keep you psychologically tied to them while simultaneously expressing their resentment through the very neediness that binds you to them. The emotional vampire often becomes addicted to the feeling of being needed and important in your life. Your willingness to drop everything to help them provides a temporary boost to their self-esteem and sense of value. But because this boost is external rather than internally generated, it never lasts. They need increasingly frequent crises to maintain the same level of attention and emotional investment from you. You start to notice that their problems never really get resolved, despite all the time and energy you invest in helping them. The same issues cycle through over and over, with slight variations. The same patterns repeat with different people or in different contexts. They seem committed to remaining in crisis rather than actually implementing the advice and support you provide. This is because resolution would end their access to your emotional energy. Healing would eliminate their excuse for constant neediness. Growth would require them to face the very inadequacies and limitations they're using you to avoid confronting. The deeper psychological pattern underlying all these signs spies, the absent support, the information gatekeeping, the emotional vampirism, is what Jung called the shadow relationship. You've become the carrier of everything this person cannot accept about themselves. They project their failures onto your successes, their limitations onto your potential, their self-hatred onto your self-worth. This projection serves as a psychological defense mechanism that allows them to maintain their self-concept without doing the difficult work of genuine self-examination and growth. Instead of facing their own envy, they focus on your supposed arrogance. Instead of acknowledging their own insecurities, they highlight your apparent neediness. Instead of examining their own limitations, they obsess over your perceived flaws. But projection is never sustainable long-term because it requires constant vigilance and energy to maintain. The person who secretly hates you is exhausted by the psychological work required to keep their projections in place. They must constantly monitor your behavior for evidence that supports their projected narrative. They must consistently reinterpret your actions through the lens of their own disowned traits. This exhaustion manifests as irritability and resentment toward you for simply existing and reminding them of the psychological work they're trying to avoid. Your presence becomes a burden because it requires them to maintain their projective defenses. Your success becomes an assault because it challenges their projected narrative about your limitations. The tragedy of the shadow relationship is that it prevents both people from experiencing authentic connection. You're not being seen for who you really are, but rather as a repository for their unprocessed psychological material. They're not showing up as their authentic self, but rather as a carefully constructed persona designed to hide their true feelings and motivations. Jung believed that the only way to heal shadow relationships is through conscious recognition and integration. The person doing the projecting must become aware of what they're doing and why. They must reclaim their disowned aspects and take responsibility for their own psychological healing. But this requires a level of self-awareness and courage that most people cannot muster. It's far easier to continue using you as an external repository for their shadow material than to face the painful work of reclaiming and integrating those aspects of themselves. The signs we've examined, from the subtle energy shifts to the systematic emotional vampirism, all point to the same underlying dynamic. Someone is using your relationship as a way to avoid their own psychological growth and healing. They need your presence to maintain their defense mechanisms, but they resent you for serving as a constant reminder of their own avoided potential. Understanding this dynamic is the first step toward freedom, but recognition alone isn't enough. To truly liberate yourself from these toxic patterns, you must understand the final signs that reveal just how far someone will go to maintain their psychological equilibrium at your expense. The final signs that reveal someone's secret hatred toward you are the most devastating because they target the very core of who you are. These aren't just patterns of behavior, they're systematic attacks on your sense of self, your confidence, and your ability to trust your own perceptions. The seventh sign manifests as the competitive undertone that infiltrates every aspect of your relationship. This person has transformed your connection into an invisible battlefield where everything becomes a contest they must win. Your achievements become threats they must neutralize. Your happiness becomes a challenge to their own sense of worth. Your very existence becomes a competition they cannot bear to lose. But this isn't obvious competition. Obvious competition would be easier to identify and address. This is subtle, pervasive, and designed to make you question whether you're imagining the entire dynamic. They've learned to compete with you while maintaining plausible deniability about their competitive intentions. When you share good news, they immediately counter with their own version that's somehow more impressive. When you mention a skill you've developed, they casually reference their superior abilities in that same area. When you talk about a positive experience, they recall a similar but better experience of the. Every conversation becomes an opportunity for them to establish dominance while appearing supportive. The psychological mechanism driving this behavior is what Jung called the inferior function activated by comparison. When someone secretly resents you, your successes trigger their deepest insecurities about their own adequacy. Rather than using this trigger as motivation for growth, they unconsciously attempt to diminish your achievements to protect their fragile self-concept. You start to notice that you can't share anything positive without triggering their need to one-up you. You can't express excitement about your life without them finding a way to demonstrate that their life is more exciting. You can't celebrate your growth without them proving that they've grown more, or faster, or in more significant ways. This creates a psychological prison where your authentic joy and excitement become liabilities in the relationship. You learn to downplay your successes to avoid triggering their competitive response. You minimize your happiness to prevent them from feeling threatened. You begin to hide your light to protect their ego. But here's what's truly insidious about this pattern. They've trained you to participate in your own diminishment. You've become complicit in making yourself smaller to manage their emotional reactions. You've learned to prioritize their psychological comfort over your own authentic self-expression. The competitive undertone extends beyond achievements into every aspect of personality and character. If you're praised for being kind, they find ways to demonstrate their superior compassion. If someone compliments your intelligence, they casually showcase their intellectual prowess. If you're recognized for your creativity, they make sure everyone knows about their artistic abilities. They cannot allow you to excel in any area without establishing their own superiority in that same domain. They cannot let you be seen as uniquely talented or valuable without proving that they possess those same qualities to an even greater degree. This pattern reveals the depth of their psychological dependence on you. They need constant comparison with you to maintain their sense of self-worth. They've become addicted to using you as a measuring stick for their own value, but they can only feel valuable when they perceive themselves as measuring higher than you do. The eighth and final sign is perhaps the most cruel, the subtle sabotage that undermines your confidence and decision-making abilities. This person has learned to plant seeds of doubt about your judgment, your capabilities, and your worth in ways that appear helpful or caring on the surface. They question your decisions just enough to make you second-guess yourself. They express concern about your choices in ways that sound supportive, but actually undermine your confidence. They offer advice that seems helpful but consistently steers you away from opportunities that might lead to success or happiness. Are you sure that's the right choice for you? I just worry that you might be rushing into something. I support whatever you want to do, but have you really thought through all the potential problems? You know I believe in you, but I just want to make sure you're being realistic about your expectations. These statements are masterfully crafted to appear caring, while actually planting doubt and fear. They position themselves as the of reason and concern, while systematically eroding your trust in your own judgment and abilities. Jung understood that this type of sabotage stems from the saboteur's terror of your potential success. On some unconscious level, they recognize that you have the capacity to achieve things they cannot, to become someone they wish they could be, to access opportunities they feel are beyond their reach. Rather than face their own limitations, they work to convince you that you have the same limitations they do. The subtle sabotage is particularly effective because it exploits your natural desire to make good decisions and avoid mistakes. They've learned to weaponize your prudence and thoughtfulness against you. They know that you value their opinion and want to consider their perspective, so they use your respect for their input to fill your mind with doubt and hesitation. You find yourself constantly seeking their approval for your decisions, even though their approval rarely comes without conditions or concerns. You second-guess choices that felt right before you discussed them with this person. You talk yourself out of opportunities that excited you after they've expressed their helpful reservations. The sabotage extends beyond major life decisions into daily confidence and self-esteem. They make subtle comments about your appearance that leave you feeling self-conscious. They question your capabilities in ways that make you doubt your competence. They highlight your past mistakes when you're feeling confident about moving forward. That color is interesting on you. It's so bold. I could never pull off something like that. You're so brave to try new things, even when they don't always work out. I admire how you keep putting yourself out there, despite everything that's happened. Each of these statements contains a hidden assault on your confidence. The comment about the bold color implies it might be too bold for you. The praise for trying new things reminds you of your failures. The admiration for putting yourself out there references past disappointments or rejections. The person delivering these subtle attacks maintains their image as someone who supports and cares about you, while systematically undermining the very confidence and self-assurance that would allow you to flourish independently of their influence. The psychological liberation from these toxic patterns begins with what Jung called conscious recognition. The moment you become fully aware of what's happening, the moment you stop gaslighting yourself about your own perceptions, you begin to reclaim your psychological power. But recognition isn't enough. You must also understand why these patterns developed and what psychological functions they serve for the other person. They haven't chosen to hate you randomly or arbitrarily. You represent something specific that triggers their deepest psychological wounds and inadequacies. Carl Jung believed that what we most strongly resist in others often represents what we most need to develop within ourselves. The person who secretly hates you is showing you, through their behavior, what they most desperately need to heal and integrate in their own psyche. Their resentment toward you is actually a roadmap to their own psychological salvation, fencing if they were brave enough to follow it. But that's their work to do, not yours. Your work is to stop allowing their unhealed wounds to dictate how you show up in the world. Your work is to reclaim the parts of yourself that you've minimized to manage their emotions. Your work is to remember who you were before you learned to make yourself smaller to fit into their psychological limitations. The path to freedom begins with what Jung called differentiation, the process of separating your authentic self from the projections and expectations others have placed upon you. You must learn to distinguish between your genuine thoughts and feelings and the ones that have been influenced by their subtle psychological manipulation. Ask yourself, who were you before you started walking on eggshells around this person? What dreams did you abandon after they expressed their helpful concerns? What aspects of your personality did you tone down to avoid triggering their competitive responses? What opportunities did you pass up because their subtle sabotage filled you with doubt? The answers to these questions will show you exactly what you need to reclaim. Jung understood that psychological healing often requires us to embrace the very qualities that others have tried to diminish in us. If they've made you feel guilty about your success, you must learn to celebrate your achievements unapologetically. If they've undermined your confidence in your judgment, you must practice trusting your own decisions. If they've made you feel selfish for having needs, you must learn to prioritize your own well-being. This process of reclamation isn't easy because it requires you to risk their disapproval and potential loss of the relationship. But here's what Jung knew that most people don't. A relationship that requires you to diminish your authentic self in order to maintain it isn't a relationship worth preserving. The fear of losing someone who secretly resents you is actually a fear of losing the familiar patterns that have defined your sense of self, even when those patterns are limiting and destructive. You've become psychologically addicted to the dynamic of trying to earn love and approval from someone who's incapable of giving it authentically. But what if you stopped trying to earn what was never truly available? What if you stopped performing a version of yourself designed to manage someone else's emotional inadequacies? What if you began to trust that your authentic self, the self that threatens their psychological defenses so much, is actually worthy of genuine love and respect? The transformation begins when you make a fundamental shift in how you interpret their behavior. Instead of seeing their subtle attacks as evidence of your flaws, you begin to recognize them as evidence of their unhealed wounds. Instead of internalizing their projections as truth about yourself, you begin to understand them as information about their internal psychological state. When they give you a cutting compliment, instead of feeling diminished, you recognize their need to feel superior. When they hijack conversations away from you, instead of feeling invisible, you see their desperate hunger for attention and validation. When they're absent during your important moments, instead of feeling unworthy of support, you understand their inability to handle your success or pain. This shift in interpretation is profoundly liberating because it removes you from the center of their psychological drama. You stop taking responsibility for managing their emotions. You stop trying to fix their insecurities by diminishing yourself. You stop participating in the dynamic that keeps both of you trapped in limiting patterns. Jung believed that true psychological freedom comes through what he called individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of your personality, including the ones that others have tried to shame or suppress. The person who secretly hates you has actually been showing you exactly which parts of yourself are most powerful and threatening to those who haven't done their own psychological work. Your brightness threatens their darkness. Your confidence triggers their insecurity. Your success highlights their stagnation. Your authenticity exposes their pretense. Your growth reminds them of their resistance to change. These aren't flaws in you that need to be fixed. These are gifts that need to be embraced and expressed more fully. The final step in your liberation is learning to trust your own perceptions about people's energy and intentions toward you. Your unconscious mind is incredibly sophisticated at detecting threat, even subtle psychological threat. When someone's energy toward you has shifted from genuine care to disguised resentment, your nervous system registers this change long before your rational mind can articulate it. Stop second-guessing your intuitive awareness. Stop making excuses for behavior that leaves you feeling drained, diminished, or confused. Stop trying to rationalize away the clear signals your psyche is sending you about someone's true feelings toward you. Trust the part of you that knows when someone's compliments contain criticism. Trust the part of you that recognizes when support is being strategically withheld. Trust the part of you that feels the competitive undertone in seemingly innocent conversations. Trust the part of you that senses the sabotage disguised as concern. Your psychological freedom depends on your willingness to honor your own perceptions and act on your own behalf, even when doing so disappoints or threatens someone who has been using your relationship to avoid their own psychological work. The moment you stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's limitations is the moment you begin to discover who you truly are when you're not performing for an audience that was never going to applaud authentically anyway. Carl Jung knew that the greatest gift you can give yourself, and paradoxically, the greatest gift you can give others, is the courage to be fully yourself, regardless of who feels threatened by your wholeness. When you stop participating in dynamics that require you to be smaller, dimmer, or less than you are, you create space for relationships based on genuine appreciation rather than psychological manipulation. The person who secretly hates you has been your greatest teacher, though not in the way they intended. They've shown you exactly which parts of yourself are most powerful by trying so hard to diminish them. They've revealed your greatest strengths by being so threatened by them. They've pointed you toward your most authentic self by making you feel so uncomfortable when you try to be anyone else. Now it's time to thank them for the lesson and step fully into the light they've been trying to dim. It's time to trust that your authentic self, the self that scared them so much they had to try to keep it hidden, is exactly who the world needs you to be. The choice is yours. Continue performing for an audience that will never truly appreciate you, or begin living for the person who deserves your authentic presence most yourself. Your liberation begins the moment you choose yourself over their comfort. Your transformation starts when you decide that your psychological freedom is more important than their need to use you as a repository for their unhealed wounds. The question isn't whether you can afford to lose this relationship. The question is whether you can afford to keep sacrificing your authentic self to maintain it. What will you choose? If this message resonated with your experience, share your thoughts below. Your story matters, and your courage to recognize these patterns is the first step toward the psychological freedom that Jung knew was every human being's birthright. Subscribe to continue this conversation about reclaiming your authentic self and building relationships based on genuine appreciation rather than hidden resentment.